Hello everyone and welcome back to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian and we are doing another Scotch whiskey review this week. This time we are back in the independent bottling scene, specifically a bottle from the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, and it's from one of my favorite distilleries, as has kind of been the theme in the last month or two. But we're looking at a 19-year-old Mortlach finished in first fill Oloroso hogsheads. Alright, happy to be back. Sorry this video is a couple days late. I'm sure you all were very, very concerned. But had a very busy weekend, long weekend. My brother Kevin, who you will know from the Uncorked podcast, who is usually on there with me, he came out to visit me here in San Diego, and we just had a weekend drinking some whiskey. We went and watched a football game up in Los Angeles, and had a great time. Set my schedule back a little bit, but we are back, and I'm looking forward to getting in and tasting this Mortlach. When I started this channel, I really thought I was going to be doing a lot of independent bottlings, just because I thought that the enthusiast community, YouTube, kind of needed a little bit more of those, and to take a look at some of these distilleries and things that we don't get a lot of, try to find the gems, try to at least help fill in maybe some expectations for other people as to what you may be able to experience. But I kind of got down into a rabbit hole of exploring distilleries and bottlings that I just have not had yet. And that's been fun, and I'm going to continue to do that to fill in the gaps in my knowledge and experience and eliminate some biases. But I figured it was time to put a brief pause on that and take a look at one of these IBs. So Mortlach has been one of my favorite distilleries. I haven't had a ton of it. This bottle's been sitting on my shelf now for a little while. I just opened it not too recently. I had another fairly well-aged Mortlach open, and I was going to finish that one first, and I did that over the summer, and decided I needed to crack another one of these open. But yeah, Mortlach is one of these distilleries where they have an official range. They have like the 12, 16, and a 20 or 21-year-old, I believe, and they don't get much love from the enthusiast community. Chill filtered, I think they're at lower ABVs, added coloring, the whole thing. And just generally speaking, everything that I've heard is that they're not particularly great, and at the very least they aren't really representative of what Mortlach does. Now Mortlach is located in Dufton in Speyside, and it uses worm tubs for its condensers, and it is known as the Beast of Dufton because it, generally speaking, is supposed to have a very kind of savory, meaty, heavy, and flavorful spirit character. Now that can make sense from Diageo's perspective, I guess. If you're trying to make something that's a little bit more mass market, you don't want something super challenging. You try to kind of strip out some of the character for those official bottlings that just, have Mortlach on it, where everything else goes into blends, and you can kind of mask that and just add as much of that savory, meaty character as you want. But if you're an enthusiast and you're looking for something a little bit more challenging, Mortlach can be a great place to look, and you can get a pretty wide range of experiences, whether you're looking at bourbon casks or all the way up to very heavily sherried experiences. This one, frankly, is a little bit of both, being that it has spent most of its life in ex-bourbon hogsheads and then was finished in first fill Oloroso casks. All right, a little bit more about this bottle then. Let's see, this is Society Cask 76.149. It's called Flavour Maize, flavor with a U, of course. This was distilled on the 30th of September 2001. Its initial cask, as mentioned, was ex-bourbon, and its final cask was first fill ex Oloroso, and it is bottled at 56.3%. All right, so I have some thoughts about finishes, and particularly when it comes to higher age-dated whiskeys, that I've really been thinking through. At some point, I want to do a video on those and just kind of talk about some of my experiences and try to get a conversation going, see what some of you all think. Feel free to leave comments below. That's fine. It can help inform me as I go forward. But I've been thinking about it a lot, again, particularly with higher age-dated whiskeys. But maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the video. But for now, why don't we get into some nosing and tasting notes and get this thing a score. All right, so as with all SMWS bottlings, they do include some tasting notes on the label. This one in particular Says pomegranate ginger glazed pork tenderloin with a very hot Szechuan sauce, followed by Thai tamarind stir fry and a garam masala chicken curry. I don't know about any of that. I have some different tasting notes for sure. That's a little exotic, maybe for my notes, but the one that I will say is pork tenderloin is a great call out. But let's see what I'm getting, particularly on the nose. So I will say, when I first opened this, which wasn't too long ago, and I had the neck pour and I stuck my nose in the glass, I would have sworn up and down, if it was a blind tasting, that this was a glass of bourbon, particularly older bourbon. There's a lot of sweet oak. There's some cherry. There is a ton of baking spice, and that will follow through on the palate. A lot of these things will follow through on the palate as well. There's vanilla, of course. And you get that savory, kind of charred meat, which, again, char, something you find in bourbon from the heavily charred casks, and just kind of an apple cherry pie example, or apple and cherry pie touch to it. Red apples, that sort of thing. So that has quieted a bit as this has opened up a bit over the few weeks that this has been open now. It's definitely, that part has calmed down. It didn't smell exactly like bourbon at that point. It wasn't the big, bold, just blast of aromas. This was more elegant. It was a little softer. You could find the creaminess. You dug in there for a little bit, you could find the malty qualities. So it wasn't exactly like bourbon, but man, that first nosing was pretty distinct, and it's certainly calmed down a bit from there. I think the big baking spices and things have calmed down quite a bit. The oakiness has calmed down, and that kind of charred meatiness has definitely kind of come to the surface a little more. But there's still definitely cherries, red apples, and a pretty good dose of vanilla, which isn't surprising because even though it is finished in Oloroso, this did spend quite a bit of time in an ex-bourbon cask. So great nose, really interesting, definitely a little different than a lot of the other sherry cask forward whiskeys that I've been nosing lately. This definitely has a little bit of a different vibe to it, even still now, even though it's calmed down just slightly. And but yeah, it's really quality. It's interesting, and it definitely feels fairly cohesive. It doesn't feel, again, with the finish, sometimes it's more like I had a Scotch whiskey that was aged in bourbon and then I just poured some sherry in it, and it just feels like this disjointed experience. This is doing pretty well on the nose, but why don't we see how it's tasting? Cheers. Yeah, it starts out kind of gentle, honey, vanilla, creamy. And then as you kind of chew on it, some of that char, meatiness starts to come out. And then once you swallow, you get a big, just burst of baking spice. Nutmeg, cinnamon, lots of vanilla kind of behind it. Very flavorful. And then into the finish, as it kind of starts to dry out a little bit, the fruits and things can kind of come more into the foreground. It's pretty honey all the way through. The oak starts to come out. You start to get a little bit of a drying tannic sensation. Still spicy. You get some darker kind of Oloroso flavors. You're getting a little bit of coffee, maybe an ever so slight dark chocolate. And then the longer the finish goes on, the fruit actually gets really interesting. I've picked up like kiwi or green melon, honeydew, that sort of thing, very late into the finish after I've taken a sip and I've kind of sat there for a little while. That fruitiness really starts to evolve, and it changes from that kind of cherry and apple, which it kind of remains on the palate for me. Bottle says pomegranate. I can buy that, but it turns into more of a green fruit like kiwi, or like specifically I think last night when I had a little pour of this, I was getting honeydew melon. All right, one more quick sip and we'll give this thing a score and talk about value. This whiskey's really fun to drink. It's the changes in sensations that you get. Another very complex sensation-wise whiskey. The flavors are really interesting because you're getting the bourbon cask flavor still. The Oloroso did not drown out that bourbon cask completely. And the Oloroso kind of comes in when needed. It's interesting. I have to assume that those baking spices are a combination of Oloroso and the bourbon cask. I'm not sure. It's like there's a lot going on, and you can tell there's kind of two things happening, but they're very intertwined. They're very integrated. And in terms of just overall experience, this is one of the better finished whiskeys that I've had period lately, and definitely one of the better higher age dated finished whiskeys I've had recently, or really in terms of bottles I've owned at least, definitely one of the best period. So yeah, all around I've really enjoyed my somewhat limited time with this whiskey. I'm not too far into this. It has changed quite a bit since the neck pour. I picked this back up in 2022, as I mentioned, I think, and it was $225. We'll talk about value in a little bit, but man, the flavor, it says Flavor Maze on the bottle. It's its title. I can kind of see that. There's a lot happening. You kind of get different phases of the flavor happening. You can pick up the kind of two cask influences at different times, but it doesn't feel disjointed. Like sometimes it just really feels like you have two different whiskeys kind of going in, that you're tasting at the same time. And this doesn't really feel that way. This is really just kind of a dynamic whiskey. It's definitely doing kind of surprising things at different times. It doesn't feel, again, I think I mentioned earlier, like you have a glass of whiskey and you just pour some sherry in it, and sometimes that's what it feels like these kind of clumsy Oloroso cask finishes taste like. But this one's a really good job, or does a really good job at the finishing process. And yeah, I think I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. There's a little bit holding it back. I can nitpick here and there. It's a little sticky. I kind of feel like sometimes you get the oily whiskeys and you can feel it on the back of your lips and you can just keep tasting it. This is more like I get residue like in the corners of my mouth, where you can, like I'm a kid and I just drank a big glass of grape juice or something like that, and you can just kind of feel the corners of your mouth sticking together. I've had that experience here a couple times, and the finish is really nice. It's good, but you can kind of tell that this, even though this is a really good job with the finish, you can, I think, still kind of tell that it's a finished whiskey, because you start to get that really nice big bloom of old whiskey flavor in the back, where it doesn't just die down, it just kind of keeps going. You get a really nice finish all the way in the back. And this, it just kind of feels like it's doing that, and then it stops. There's still a finish. There's still a finish that lingers. It still tastes really good, but there is a little bit of an abruptness to the end of the crescendo, as I tend to call it, like that, where the flavor bloom is happening, and then it works into the finish. With this one, it drops off just a little bit, but it's not bad. It's nitpicky, but to me, that is one of the reasons why, particularly with the older age-stated whiskeys, I'm not a huge fan of finishes. So just generally, finishes are great, particularly with like younger whiskeys, anything up to kind of that 15-year-old age range. I think you can do some really interesting things. I'd probably rather see a vatting, a blend happening, but obviously with single casks, you can't really do that. It just seems to make a little bit more sense if you're vatting two things that are fully matured. Finishing on younger whiskeys, that the whiskey itself is still kind of vibrant and pops enough where it can kind of compete with the finish. But when it comes to older whiskeys, again, I can make a whole video on this, and maybe I will. You got to kind of ask yourself why they did it. Either they're doing it just to do it because they're trying to premiumize it. They want it just to be sherried, whatever. Or they're trying to fix something, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have a barrel that doesn't taste really good and it's been aging for a long period of time, it seems, hey, let's try to fix it. We don't want to waste it. I'm not going to just pour it down the drain. You could try to blend it away or something like that, but obviously as an independent bottler, if you've had this cask for a while or something, you may not be able to do that either. Anyways, I have become suspicious of the older age statement whiskeys, particularly from independent bottlings that are finished. Haven't had great luck with those. Not that they've been bad, just what am I paying for sort of thing. And this one, again, this was an expensive bottle, as lots of bottles from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society are in the U.S. $225 for a 19-year-old cask strength whiskey isn't ridiculous, but it's certainly not a bargain, especially given that this was 2 years ago. So the prices were definitely elevated then, but they've gotten even worse since then. So value-wise, it's tough. If you ignore the high shipping that I had to pay for this bottle back then and taxes and things like that, and you just look at it as a $225 bottle, it's still probably fair at best, probably a little bit below average, and then you have to throw in the extra cost that even have this shipped to me from the U.S. to the U.S., which again is one of the reasons why I don't have more SMWS bottlings. But yeah, this is going to end up being almost a $275 bottle or something like that when it's all said and done. Probably wouldn't buy it again at that price. This is definitely more of a $150, $175 all in. But it's still a really good whiskey. I have it. I'm going to enjoy it regardless. I do think the whiskey itself probably gets an 8 out of 10. It's fun. It's delicious. It's surprising. And I definitely have room on my shelf for bottles like that. So I think with that, now's a good time to wrap things up. I do appreciate you guys sticking through to the end and listening to me ramble on a little bit about independent bottlings. They are fun. They're, every time you pop a new one open, there's just a world of possibilities for better or worse. This was definitely for the better. I'm going to really enjoy this. I'm sure this bottle is going to open up even more as time goes on. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what your opinions of Mortlach are, and hey, SMWS, bottle finishes, whatever is piquing your interest this week. But I do look forward to talking to all of you again next week with another whiskey review. Cheers.